In this lesson, we'll be creating a simple slideshow using our timeline, and we'll begin to use some programming in this exercise, and we'll be setting our files to HTML5. Therefore, our scripting will be using JavaScript. It's actually going to generate the JavaScript for us for the most part. So I'm starting with a starter file that I've provided for you that you should have downloaded here. And it will look blank when you open it, but if you pop over to the library, you will see a number of image assets have been included. The stage has also been pre-sized to accommodate these images. I would recommend simply going up to the percentage for your view and click Fit in Window. And then immediately after that, I would do a Save As on your file. So I'm going to do that right now as well. And by the way, you will need to create a root folder to save these files because it does generate a number of files. So I've already got one here. I've called it slideshow_html5. But name your file last name. And I believe this is lesson 5. So we'll go last name number.fla. And if it's lesson 6, well then name it 6 and so on. So I'll name that and I will save that. So now I have saved a proper file that is separate from the downloaded file. And it also has some place to stay on the hard drive. So we'll start, I think I'll start by showing you a finished version of what we're going to create here. So I do have one open up in the tabs. And basically, if you look at the timeline, I've got 4 layers. One to accommodate buttons. So we're going to learn how to do buttons in this one. These 5 elements over here on the right are buttons. And then the next layer up is for the slides. And if I move my playhead, when I click a button, it will correlate to the different frame that has that large slide on it, as you can see here. In the timeline, I have keyframed the frames that will hold the separate slide images. And as a guide, when we're doing navigation, a best practice is to navigate to what are called frame labels. So I've dedicated a layer just for my frame labels, more for the sake of this exercise. You can put a frame label on any keyframe, but I've dedicated a whole layer to my frame labels, and you can see here I have a keyframe in alignment with my image keyframes, and I've used just a little shorthand PG01, meaning page 1. My second frame is called PG02, and so on up until PG05. Now the top layer is called Actions, and that's where we put all of our code. Our code actually goes into a keyframe. And this code, I want it to be persistent throughout the span of the movie here. So I have one keyframe at the beginning that will hold all of my code. Basically, the code we're going to use today is simply to put a pause on frame 1 and also have navigation code connected to each of these buttons. And when I click each button, it will move the playhead and freeze or stop at that particular frame. Okay, so that's what we're going to build here. I will do a test movie. Again, this is done in HTML5 format, so it will run in the browser when I do test movie. I'm on a Mac, so it'll be Control Return, but on a PC it would be, actually on a PC it would be Control Enter, and on the Mac it's Command Return. Alright, so here we have our slideshow sitting static in a frame on my browser, and you can see when I mouse over these, the little hand appears, indicating they are clickable buttons, and each one of these takes me, in this case, to a special frame, and we pause on that frame when we arrive at it. Okay, so a simple little slideshow that can be run, again, online in a web page. So I'm just going to toggle over to my Adobe Animate here, and I think we'll just start from the start. So I do have my initial file here. Again, just to be sure, I'm just going to go Fit in Window. And I'll start with my one layer. I've already named it here before starting the video, called Buttons. But I'll create my other layers right away as well. I'll make a new layer. On top of there, I'll call this one Slides. And then another layer above that, I'll call it Frame Labels. Frame _ labels. Make sure I type that correctly there. My tab key for that, or my enter key, and one more for my code, which is a layer that we call actions. The code layer should always be on the top, for the reason that when this downloads on a web page, it downloads from the bottom layer to the top. And just ignore the sounds of dogs barking in the background. Okay, so my code goes on the top again because when a file loads, it loads from the bottom up. So I don't want to be loading code before my other assets have loaded, or it could cause glitches and errors. All right, so that's why actions goes on the top. I'm going to save this. And I can span it out. Maybe I'll span it out now, but I won't make any keyframes yet. So I'll click down on frame 30, and I can do it on frame 25. Click downwards to highlight them, and F5 to span. There we go. And I'll save. Okay, I still have nothing on the stage, but I'm going to start on my slides layer. And I'll grab the image called Vacation 1. And I'm just going to position that to the far right. And then on my buttons layer, I'm going to position the 5 buttons along the left side. So I'm going to click on the layer for buttons now. And you know what? Let me undo that because I made a bad mistake in so much as I wasn't paying attention where my playhead was. I want all this to happen on frame 1. Okay, one more time with feeling. I will grab that image for the slides layer, yes. Drag it in there and then position it. Then highlight my buttons layer and drag the images of the 5 buttons in a stack here. So I'll start with the first one. They're called, they end in the word thumb for thumbnail. There's for vacation image 1, vacation 2 thumb. And I'll align these shortly, so I'll just rough them in here right now. 3, 4, and 5. As I said, I can align these perfectly. I'm just going to shift click on all of them here. And then come up to modify. Align horizontal center. And to even the spaces, I believe it's called distribute. Modify, align, distribute heights. And you see what that did? It gave me the exact same space between each item. Definitely want to save that. Okay. And what I want to do is I actually want to make these things buttons. So that's a new thing for us. And they're in the group of symbols. We've done movie clips. We're going to do a button for these. So once these are aligned, just select the top graphic. Make sure you don't select any of the others, just the top one. And if you're not sure, you can click in an empty area, then click on it. And we're going to convert that to a button. Modify, convert to symbol. Make sure it's set to button. And I'm just going to give it a very short name for the library, BUT01. And hit my OK button. And just go down and convert them all to symbols. They're going to be very simple buttons today, but they will be interactive. Okay, I've selected the second graphic here. Modify, convert to symbol, button, BUT02. And along I go, modify, convert to symbol. The third one, BUT03. Clicking on the fourth one now, modify, convert to symbol. BUT04. And you did see the shortcut was F8. But I'm just going to continue to click and use the pull down menu, convert to symbol, button type, BUT05. Definitely want to save that. Okay, so I've got my buttons done. I could do a mouse over, but maybe I'll save that for the end as a bonus feature where I can change the color of these buttons. But for now, they are functional buttons. However, if I was to run the movie right now, you know, nothing's moving yet. I've just got the one frame with the one slide. So what I want to do is create like the illusion of 5 pages, basically. So 5 different places for the slides. So on the slide layer, I'm going to keyframe every 5th frame. Select the frame and hit F6. create a keyframe. All right, and then again, come over here, select the frame, F6, create the frame. And just move my playhead along and then select the frame in the layer called slides and hit my F6 key. That's the shortcut for making keyframes. And F6. All right, I'm going to save that. I'm going to show you a really cool trick because if you notice, each keyframe has the same image right now. We can go and actually swap these images. A nice feature. So I'm going to go back to frame 2 because frame 1 already has the appropriate picture. So on frame 5, I'm going to select it on the stage, go to the properties, and this double arrow icon is your swap icon. Swap it with the next picture, Vacation 2. And we're just going to go down the row here, select it on the stage, and swap it Vacation 3, and so on. Click and swap Vacation 4, and then finally on that last keyframe, click on the stage, swap it out in my properties with the desired image, in this case Vacation 5, and definitely save. Okay. Now if I was to do a test movie, I still have no code in here, and as you know, with Adobe Animate, the playhead runs through and cycles endlessly. When it hits the last frame, it comes back and loops back. So I'll quickly demonstrate that. I'm going to do a test movie on the keyboard. And it will pop open in the browser. And as you can see, and as predicted, it's cycling through all of those frames. So I need a way to stop that. Let me just go back to my timeline here. And I'm going to move my playhead back to frame 1. And I will select the first frame in my actions layer. So to put a pause feature, we do have a couple of ways of putting code in when we're not hand coding, but the code does go in a window called Actions. Okay, so I'm going to open that, and maybe I'll shrink it and pull it aside a bit for a second here, and call up another window called Code Snippets. Today I'm going to use my code snippets to generate most of my code. So we have two main folders here to choose from. I'm going to choose the one called HTML5 Canvas. Now inside of there are a series of subfolders. We're dealing mostly with timeline navigation. We want to affect the timeline. So I'm going to open up timeline navigation. And right there at the top I have what's called Stop at this frame. So you'll remember I selected that frame in my actions layer on frame 1. All I have to do here is double click this to apply it. And what it does is it actually drops code in my actions panel, which is where my code actually sits. So this is JavaScript for stop at this frame. This dot stop brackets semicolon. I'm going to save that and I'm going to test it before putting any more code in. Again, I'm using my keyboard to test movie here. Okay, so it's not cycling through anymore. I know that the code worked, and I can continue from here. So the next code will be the navigation for these 5 buttons. So there's a little bit of a setup when we have buttons and we not want to navigate to specific frames. 2 things primarily. I'm going to close my actions window here and close this temporarily. Go to my timeline. Each button, when we want to speak to it with code, needs to be assigned a special name called an instance name. That way they have a way to be identified in the code. So we're going to go through and select each button separately and apply what's called an instance name. And that's done in the Properties panel. So I've already clicked on my first button. Going into the box called Instance Name in Properties, and I'll call it PG. Actually, I'll call it BT. BUT01 underscore BTN for button. And I'll hit my Enter key. Okay, so I'm going to name them all accordingly. Clicking on the second button, applying a new instance name. Use all lowercase and no spaces. BUT02 underscore BTN for button. Hit your Enter key. Alright, so I'm naming all of them here. I've just selected my third one. BUT03 underscore BTN. Hit my Enter key. Fourth button. So this is all part of the setup in order for the buttons to communicate with the code. Underscore BTN, hit my enter key there, and one more to do. BUT05 underscore BTN. Okay, hit my enter key, and I definitely want to save that. So I've just saved it. So now all of my buttons have names. With my properties panel open, if I click each one, you'll see it will reflect the name of each of those assigned buttons. Okay, so that's step one. Now my buttons have a name to talk to the code. I also need to give names to my frames. This is why I have a dedicated layer called frame labels. And the way it works is you can attach a name, like a custom name, to a frame to identify it, no matter where it is on the timeline, and it attaches to a keyframe. So for my first keyframe here, with my playhead here, I'm going to select that keyframe. And in the same fashion, over in Properties, we have a name box. I'm just going to call it PG01. So that's the name of my first keyframe in alignment with my first photograph. Then I'm going to move my playhead over here. Select that first frame, keyframe it with the F6 on the keyboard. Then I will assign a name, PG02, hit my enter key, and just move along the timeline like this. Select that frame in that layer intended for my frame labels. Create keyframe F6, then give it a proper name, PG04 or 03 rather. Okay, and then move my playhead along, and you can see that these are lining up, right, with the keyframes for the images. Select that frame, keyframe it, F6, give it a name, PG04. Oh, let me just get the 4 here. There we go. And one more. Okay, so I'll select that frame, keyframe it, F6, give it its unique name, PG05. Hit my enter key and definitely save that. So all my grunt work's done here. I see I accidentally put it in this frame. So I'm going to remove it from here. This was an accident. I'm going to select that first frame, and I'm just going to highlight it and delete it and hit my return key. Okay, and save again. Okay, I intended all of my frame labels to be on this layer. So now I not only have a button that can be addressed using the code, I have a frame label that can also be addressed using the code. So I just need to create an action where when clicked, go to the designated frame label. So we can do that also through code snippets. So I'm going to select the button. That's how you do it for a button click. You select the button on the stage. Let me open my code snippets window here. And in HTML5, once again in timeline navigation, you see down here, click to go to frame and stop. So you double click that and it pops it into your actions window, which is where the actual code sits. And I'll open this up a bit. And there's one thing we need to modify. Just to cut to the chase, here's my button number, or my button name rather. And this is the command go to and stop. What is in the brackets, in this case is a frame number, but we're using frame labels as a best practice. You just replace that number with quote marks and the frame label. When I typed my quote marks, it did do 2 quote marks. And the frame label for this first button is PG01. All right, I'm just going to click outside here and save that. Now I can't really test that because it starts on that page, so I'll go ahead and click on the second button on the stage. Again, find my code snippets here and double click go to frame and stop. Okay, so this is the one that should go to the second frame. So I'm going to highlight that number 5 placeholder in the brackets down here. Initiate quote marks, and this one is intended to go to PG02. Now I have something to test. I'm going to save this and do my test movie. So if things are working properly, I can toggle between the first image and the second. And there we go. And you can see here also that it turns into a little hand. when I mouse over it. So I have the two first buttons done. So I just have to repeat that for the next 3 buttons. And that will be our slideshow that can run on a web page and using some basic JavaScript code that is for the most part being generated on our behalf. But you can see it. You can go in and you can modify it when we get more familiar with the syntax of that code. So I'm just going to continue to go here, highlight my buttons, third button, go to my code snippets, and double click. Click to go to frame and stop, and then modify the code by highlighting that placeholder, inserting my quote marks, and this one is intended to go to PG03. Save it, and I'll click on the fourth button here. Go to my code snippets, double click, click to go to frame and stop, modify that line of code inside of what's called a function, which we will learn more about in future lessons. Insert my quote marks, and this one is intended for PG04. Save it. I'm saving every time. Command S or Control S on the PC. And I'll finally click on that last button at the bottom there. Go to my code snippets, double click, click to go to frame and stop. And replace that placeholder. Quote marks, PG05. Save that, test that. Okay, here we go. And that is our primer, our first lesson using some HTML5 code to create some interactivity by including buttons and a destination, if you will, for a playhead to move to a unique keyframe, which has been identified by using frame labels. Okay, so let me just go back to Animate here. And again, there's all of our code. I'll just shrink that view a bit. This is actually the code that stopped the page, and these are the bits of code that control the buttons. I'm just going to close that and close that. If you want to put a background color, just click on the background there, and you can go to your stage color chip and just put whatever you want in there. You don't have to, but I'm going to do that and save it again. One last test, and you'll see that framed area in the browser. There we go. Again, quick test. Everything works beautifully. So that's our assignment for today. I'd like you to create this slideshow. Again, using the HTML5 setting on your file, which actually has been preset on your behalf, so you don't need to be too concerned, but it will be HTML5. And hand this in on Canvas. Zip up the whole folder that contains all of the elements to this file. And that's our slideshow assignment.